The night Ilara Voss left Iron Hollow, the sky was the color of cold ash. She carried nothing with her. No bag, no coat, no letter of farewell. She only carried what no one could take, the small, steady heartbeat of the child growing inside her, and the knowledge that she had done nothing wrong. She walked through the eastern gate of the Pack territory without looking back, not because she was not hurting, she was. But Ilara had always understood that some pain grows larger the more you look at it, so she kept her eyes forward and her steps even, and she walked into the dark. Just 3 hours before, she had been standing in the great hall of Iron Hollow, the most powerful wolf pack in the Northern Territories, dressed in the silver and white of Aluna, her husband's chosen mate and queen. The hall had been full. Every elder, every warrior, every household head had stood in silence and watched as King Aldrich, her mate, her husband, the man she had loved for 6 years, read the charges against her aloud. Conspiracy, betrayal, treason against the pack. The words had felt like stones dropping into still water. She had listened to all of them without flinching, because flinching would have been mistaken for guilt. The charges had come from Countess Mira, a woman who had been at Aldrich's side long before Ilara arrived, who smiled with warmth and thought with the coldness of deep winter. Mira had placed forged letters before the Elder Council. Letters, she claimed, that proved Ilara had been sharing Iron Hollow's border plans with a rival pack, the Thornridge Wolves, in exchange for promise of safety after Aldrich's expected death in an upcoming territorial dispute. There had been no such letters, there had been no such arrangement. Ilara had never spoken to anyone from Thornridge in her life. But Aldrich had believed it. Or perhaps, and this was the thought that quietly broke her heart, he had found it easier to believe it than to trust her. His pride had always been a closed door, and once a thought entered it, almost nothing could push it back out. Elder Bowen, the oldest member of the council, had looked at her with something that seemed almost like apology, but he had said nothing in her defense. And silence, Ilara had learned that night, is its own kind of betrayal. Aldrich had not looked at her when he gave the order. He had spoken to the hall, to the stone walls, to the fire in the grate, anywhere but her eyes. Ilara Voss is hereby stripped of the title of Luna of Iron Hollow. She is to leave this territory before dawn. She is not to return. And so she left. She settled in the Ashfen borderlands, a stretch of wild, unclaimed land between several pack territories, where no one ruled and no one asked questions. It was not a gentle place. The winters were sharp, the soil was stubborn, and the nearest market was a 2-hour walk through thick forest. But it was hers, and after a life spent inside the walls of a king's court, there was something deeply honest about a place that gave you only what you worked for. She built a small house with help from a few loner wolves, people who had also, in different ways, been pushed to the edges of the world they once belonged to. She planted a garden. She learned to treat wounds and fevers, and word spread quietly that there was a woman in Ashfen who had skilled hands and asked for nothing in return except honesty. 4 months after she arrived, on a night when the frost came early and the wind moved through the tree line like a held breath, Ilara gave birth to her daughter. She named her Sarah. It meant star, in an old language that most wolves had forgotten. Ilara had not forgotten it. Sarah grew up knowing 2 things with certainty: that her mother was the strongest person she had ever seen, and that somewhere to the north, behind stone walls and old laws, there was a place that had treated her mother as though she were nothing. Ilara never described Iron Hollow with anger. She described it with the careful, measured voice of someone who has already made peace with a thing, which, in its own way, told Sarah everything. You do not make peace with something that did not first do you real harm. Sarah asked questions. Her mother answered some of them. The rest, Sarah found herself answering on her own. In the years she spent studying pack law from every book she could find, training with a former Iron Hollow combat elder named Rask, who had left the pack in quiet disgust years before, and slowly, carefully building something. She built trust. First with the loner wolves of Ashfen, then with a border clan to the west called the Dunmore, who had long been ignored by Iron Hollow's leadership. Then with a group of displaced wolves from a pack that Aldrich had absorbed and poorly governed into near collapse. None of these people were powerful in the way that courts and titles measure power, but they were loyal in the way that matters most, They chose her, freely, every single day. By the time Sarah was 19 years old, she had 60 wolves at her back and a plan built on years of patience. Inside Iron Hollow, things had changed, and not for the better. Countess Mira's influence over Aldrich had grown so deep that even the senior warriors sometimes struggled to reach him. Decisions that should have taken a day took weeks. Border disputes that could have been resolved with a clear word from the Alpha were instead left to fester until they became small crises. 3 of Iron Hollow's oldest sub-packs had formally withdrawn their loyalty pledges and petitioned for independence. The pack elders began meeting in secret, something that had not happened in living memory. They were not planning rebellion, they were simply afraid, and they had nowhere else to take that fear. Aldrich felt something was wrong. He could sense it the way all alphas can sense a shift in their pack. A low, background unease, like a sound at the edge of hearing, but he could not name it. He did not connect it to the woman he had sent away. He had stopped thinking about Ilara years ago, or so he told himself. Sarah arrived at the Iron Hollow eastern gate, the same gate her mother had walked through in the opposite direction, 19 years before, on a cold autumn morning, with 60 wolves behind her, and a formal invocation prepared. She did not arrive with threats, she arrived with law. She invoked the right of bloodline claim, an ancient provision in pack governance that allowed a direct descendant of a seated alpha to bring a formal challenge before the Elder Council. It had not been used in over 100 years. But it was real, and it was valid, and Sarah had spent 4 years building a case that used it correctly. The council had no choice but to hear her. The trial lasted 3 days. Sarah presented the original forged letters, preserved by an archivist named Davin, who had fled Iron Hollow after Mira began pressuring him to destroy certain records. She presented testimony from 2 pack warriors who had been present the night of the accusation and had noticed inconsistencies in Mira's account that they had been afraid to voice at the time. She presented Ilara herself, who sat in the council chamber in plain, unremarkable clothes, and said almost nothing because her daughter had already said everything that needed to be said. Mira fought back. She questioned Sarah's lineage. She questioned the authenticity of the documents. She questioned the motives of every witness. Aldrich sat through most of the trial without speaking. He watched his daughter, a young woman he had never met, who had his posture and her mother's eyes, and a mind that moved faster than anyone else in the room, dismantle a lie that had shaped the last 2 decades of his kingdom. He did not recognize, at first, what he was feeling. Then he did. It was the particular weight of a man who has been wrong about something important for a very long time. On the 3rd day, the council returned its decision. The evidence of forgery was clear. The expulsion of Ilara Voss had been unlawful. The right of bloodline claim was valid. Countess Mira was stripped of her title and escorted to the eastern gate. She was given 1 hour to leave Iron Hollow territory. The symmetry was not lost on anyone. Aldrich was not formally punished. The council did not exile him or strip his title. Not yet. But the pack's loyalty had already moved. The room did not look to him for what came next. It looked to Sarah. He asked, through a council messenger, if Ilara would be willing to speak with him privately. Ilara considered the request for a long time. Then she agreed. Not because she owed him anything, but because she had spent 19 years making peace with what happened, and she was curious to see if he had spent even one. They met in a small room off the main hall. Aldrich looked older than she had expected. He looked like a man who had carried something heavy for a long time, without ever acknowledging the weight. He said he was sorry. He said it plainly, without excuses or explanations attached. He said he should have listened. He said he should have trusted her. Ilara listened. Then she stood up, nodded once, and left the room. She did not forgive him. She did not need to. Forgiveness was for her benefit, and she had already given herself something better than forgiveness. She had given herself a life she was proud of, a daughter she admired more than anyone she had ever known, and a community in Ashfen that loved her genuinely. Sarah was formally recognized as the rightful heir and new alpha of Iron Hollow 3 days later. She restructured the Elder Council to include representation from the border clans. She opened formal dialogue with the sub-packs that had withdrawn. She reduced the levels of the court hierarchy so that decisions could move faster and reach her without being filtered through layers of interested advisors. She asked her mother what role she wanted in the new order of things. Ilara thought about it for a moment. Then she said she would like to continue healing. There was a great deal of work still to do in Ashfen, and she had made promises to people there. Sarah arranged for a small, well-supplied healing station to be established on the Ashfen border, inside Iron Hollow's territory, but close enough to the edge that Ilara could serve both worlds. Aldrich lived out his remaining years inside Iron Hollow as a private citizen. He was not celebrated. He was not exiled. He was simply there, an old man in a kingdom that had moved past him, watching his daughter build something better than what he had built, because she had been raised by someone he had failed to value when he had the chance. Iron Hollow, for the first time in a generation, began to feel like a place people chose to stay in, rather than a place they stayed in because they were afraid to leave. And in the Ashfen borderlands, in a small house with a well-kept garden, and walls that had seen both the worst and the best of one woman's life, Ilara Voss slept soundly. She had always known who she was. The world had simply taken a while to catch up. End.